Good morning, everybody. I toast to you and all you do. I hope you're having a fantastic morning. Enjoying the last of your summer days. I just have so many things that I would like to talk about today, but I'm not going to. Some of them more controversial than others. You guys aren't in my head, so you don't know what's really funny. But I'm not going to go there. I'm going to work on a video about pagan community. And that'll be on another day, because that's one of the things that I would kind of like to talk about today, because it's rattling in my brain. And we're not going to go there today. I think that conversation will ruffle a lot of feathers. So I'm not going to go there. But I am going to talk about the blue moon. This is also going to ruffle some feathers. I mean, not like the other conversation, I guess. Anyways, without further ado, let's actually talk about something productive. So, the blue moon. So there is an amazing full moon happening on Samhain, or the last harvest, or Halloween, or whatever you call it, the witch's night, witch's eve. And it's going to be very exciting. But you're also going to see a lot of posts and a lot of things going up talking about how this is a blue moon. This has become like my side quest in my practice and in communicating with people, is to discuss the blue moon and what it really means, and this energy and our calendars and the solar and moon and lunar and orbits and all of that stuff. Okay, so in the 30s, in I want to say Space Time magazine, or no, in the Farmer's Almanac, a gentleman was writing an article. He had done some research. He had learned about the blue moon, but he had misinterpreted it. And it's easy to do, because the definition of a blue moon is complicated. And the definition of a true blue moon is celebrated by our ancestors when there are 13 full moons in 1 year. From solstice to solstice is how our ancestors would have seen a year, not from January 1st to December 31st. Two different things. That's like the first place that we have to kind of clear up that misconception. Our ancestors did not use our calendar. They did not say January 1st. The Romans did, but we'll get there. Anyway, so the definition of a true blue moon is the third full moon in a season of moon, or in a season that has 4 moons. So normally there are 3 full moons in a season, 3 dark moons in a season, and that creates 12 moons in a year, and thus we have our normal moon cycle. If we were using the moon as our ancestors did to count the days through the year, when there's an extra full moon, it really would have changed things. And energy-wise, because the moons next to the solstices were so important in the energy and the creation of the energy and the celebration and all of that stuff, they wouldn't have altered those moons and said, hey, we have this extra moon. They would have the third full moon. That way it's not messing with one of the solstices. 3 is a divine number. There are lots of things that go along with that. So that is what a blue moon is. Now this happens, I think it's like every 3 point something years. It's like a weird number, like 3.2, because again, our modern calendar is different than a lunar calendar. So let's talk a little bit about the calendar, okay? Back in the day when Rome was big and Greece was big, and they were creating democracy and they were creating empires and they were doing all of these things. So Rome, it started in Greece and moved to Rome. Anyways, they had 2 calendars. So they had one guy whose whole life was to keep the political calendar. So the days that they had voting and the days that they did political things, okay? And this was very important, the days that Congress met and the days that the Senate met and blah, 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 and all of those things. That was his job, was to keep that calendar, to post that calendar, to spread the news of his calendar, okay? Then there was another guy and I'm just saying guy, person, whatever, it's probably a group of people, a holy man, somebody, a holy woman, a holy person, their entire life was dedicated to keeping track of the holy days. Um, and this isn't just unique to the Romans. Actually, all cultures had this holy person whose whole life was dedicated to tracking the sun and the moon and the stars and where everything lined up. This is one of the things that helped us progress into an agricultural state, that helped us, master our environment in order for us to evolve as a species. But it was through tracking the moon and the sun and the stars and the planets and all of that stuff where that began. Now, in ancient Rome, there were two calendars. So they had the political calendar and they had the religious calendar. And I don't remember, I want to say his name was Gregorian because that's what we call the calendar. But I'm probably wrong. I'm sure somebody out there knows the truth. I could Google it and look it up. Maybe I will. Put it in the comments. Talk about it later. But anyways, a Roman emperor decided we don't need two calendars anymore. We're going to separate church and state even more so. And we're going to go to one calendar. And this is what it's going to be. And that's what they created. The modern calendar that we have now. It was altered throughout the years. Some emperor, or throughout the emperor, whatever. Some emperors added new months, like August, Julius, July. Anyway, so some people added some extra months here or there, changed it a little bit, but then we ended up with what we have now as our modern calendar. And it does a great job at keeping track of the solar year. Now, another part of this shift also has to do with the transition from paganism to Christianity in the Roman Empire. When we're talking about the goddesses and the moons and the many holidays and the solstices and the equinoxes and all the days in between, I mean, they had, one of the reasons that they were so successful is because they just brought in other people's paganism and they were like, oh, bring your gods with you. You can be our slaves and bring your gods. And that's really what happened. And so they did that over and over again, and they just brought in all of these different deities and their holidays, and they celebrated. So depending on where you were in the empire, different holidays were celebrated, and different gods were celebrated. But they had holidays like, I mean, this was a partying society. If you really track the calendar of all of the different gods and the different cults and the different, churches and temples and all of that stuff, they had a lot going on. They were partying, constantly celebrating different gods. I mean, if you were a person who just wanted to celebrate the divine, you could probably spend all day, every day in a temple celebrating one god or another for one festival or another. But during the transition from paganism to Christianity, they were trying to hush that stuff, tone it down, move over here. They kept some of the holidays, they kept some of the calendar dates. But things got adjusted in order to fit with the solar calendar so that it could be consistent every year. They didn't celebrate the solstice on the solstice because they didn't want to be pagan anymore. They wanted the church and they wanted Christianity. But they still wanted to celebrate then. So they just subtle shift to a couple days later. We're going to celebrate this holiday. Same thing with Easter. We're not going to celebrate the equinox. We're going to celebrate a little differently. We're going to do a little shift. We'll still have some holidays, but we're not going to have as many. We're going to tone down. We're going to control our society. We're going to find some peace and order. And so that was the whole transition, okay? And that changed the way that we tracked time, globally as people. Now, you can go to some places in the world where they still have two calendars. They have the Western calendar, which is our normal calendar, January, February, whatever, and then they have their own calendar, which still uses the moon or the moon, because that's how most ancient societies kept track of time. It still uses the moon to keep track of it. The Hindu calendar is a great example. There's a Nigerian calendar for the natives that have that have their own religion and their own life that has nothing to do with our modern calendar. Okay, so this happens all over the world still. So keep that in mind also. Just as one of those things that you should know, that not everybody uses January 1st as their calendar. Um, so anyways, back to the blue moon. Okay, so the Earth's energies and the gods and the moon and all of that stuff does not care about our calendar. What we put January 1st and this and that and blah blah, not important to those energies. Those energies say, oh, okay, that's how they are labeling their time at this point in the evolution of human society. That's how they're doing it right now. More power to them. Let them have at it. It's not going to change when the solstice comes in its cycle and when we orbit closer to the moon or further from the moon, or when we have an extra moon in the year. Those things have to do with literally the orbit and the orbits of the planets and the moon and the sun and our rotations, and when we're close to each other and far away from each other, and all of these different angles and mathematical equations and things that are like, which is another thing that someday we're going to have a conversation about the lack of faith that we have in our ancestors for being intelligent, capable people. It really drives me crazy, all of these people who are like, oh, it must have been aliens who came down to the earth because our ancestors could not have been smart enough to build a pyramid. Whew. We're not going to have that conversation because it gets me really angry. Our ancestors were very, very capable, and they deserve so much credit for the things that they did, because people now would die if they had to live like our ancestors. So, just saying. Anyways, so back to the calendar. Our ancestors, they didn't use this calendar. The gods, they don't care about this calendar. The earth and her energy doesn't care about this calendar. The sun is like rocking it. He's like, hell yeah, they are using me as their number one, keep track of time. But for the most part, they're like, that's nice. So by putting a magical definition on this calendar that we use is, for lack of a better word, silly in my opinion. And that's just my opinion. And I've discussed this with many people, and I've heard the argument that, well, because people all over the world honor this as a magical occurrence, it gives it power. And yes, it does. If everybody came together and said, we're going to honor this moment, that energy would be put out there, and you would be able to feel that, palpate that energy. Now, I was going to say something about society and just keep my mouth shut. Anyway, so a blue moon became this modern thing when the guy in this Farmer's Almanac accidentally misprinted it. Now, I'm sure he was not intentionally I'm going to misprint this because I want to change this definition. I think that he was confused in trying to understand how our ancestors and how the Native Americans and how the people before Christianity rationalized this extra moon. It would have been a big deal because, according to the moons, that time period got longer. But according to everything else, it didn't. So it would have been one of those things, like when you're contemplating and you're counting and you're mathematically lining things up and you're trying to figure that out, it would have been like, hey, this is a problem. We've identified the problem. Here's how it is. Because it would have made things weird to line up. And our ancestors figured it out, like, hey, every so many years, every so many cycles, we have an extra cycle, and this is a magical moment when we have extra energy from the moon and from the goddess and from this energy. And again, that was the third full moon in a season of 4 full moons. Not the second full moon in a month. And I always love it because whenever there's a modern blue moon, it's not like that worldwide. Like I said, in some places the full moon is going to come on November 1st and not October 31st. Because Time is relative to where you're standing. That's a mind-blowing concept just to think about in itself, but difference in time and the relativity of it. And when you just think even about on our own planet, me standing here in Colorado and somebody standing in Australia are experiencing much different time. One of us is almost in the future and one of us is almost in the past, but we're experiencing this moment at the same time. Things to contemplate. So, with that, then it wouldn't be a blue moon because the people in Australia are not experiencing it as though the people in America are. A true blue moon, however, that when there are 13 full moons in one solstice to solstice, from like winter solstice around to winter solstice, people in Australia and people in Colorado and people in Great Britain and people in South America all experience this extra blue moon, and that is the energy that we are honoring, and that is the blue moon. That is when we honor this heightened energy of the moon, where we are receiving it. It's like an extra. I don't even know, but it is different. Okay, now with all of that said, that doesn't take away from the fact that this Samhain is going to be magical, that we are going to have a great full moon on this Witch's Eve, and we are going to be able to have an amazing time. And we should all get out and honor that full moon. This is an amazing, momentous occasion. The goddess is blessing our visits with the dead. We are going to have our paths illuminated by the full moon, and it's going to be beautiful, and I encourage everybody to get out and dance under the full moon. But let's please stop confusing an ancient, honored time with a modern misconception. I don't know, it's almost like, I don't want to say this. It's almost, for me, this like touches on cultural appropriation. Like, we are taking something from our ancestors and mutating it into some modern reality that isn't real. It is, okay, whatever. Yeah, I guess you'll just have to understand what I mean, because we're like manipulating this ancient tradition into something that fits in with what we think it should now, and that's cultural appropriation, and that's doing our ancestors wrong. And I guess that's where my frustration comes from. Just like with the many things that we make assumptions and then we just biasedly make it what we want. That's not the truth in this case. So, honor your ancestors by learning these definitions. Honor the people that we say, oh, we are practicing the ways of our ancestors, so let's actually do that and not just assume. And mutate it into what we want it to be. So, without any further ramblings, I hope that everybody has a blessed day, and that your dark moon today is wonderful, and that your solstice and your equinox and everything is fantastic. I will talk to you all again soon. Many blessings to you.